Inaugurated by President Muhammadu Buhari on the 19th of July 2022, the NNPC has now officially transitioned to a limited liability entity in line with the provisions of the Petroleum Industry Act. With the change in structure, the company will now be regulated in line with the provisions of the Companies and Allied Matters Act, that's CAMA. This transition has created a significant departure from the company's previous operations, whereby major decisions has to be made based on the Federal Executive Council's approval, thus exalting NNPC Limited with higher expectations around regulatory compliance, active engagement with stakeholders, and perhaps most significantly, accountability. I'm being joined from our Abuja studios by Mr. Ajuri. Ngelale is the Senior Special Assistant to the President Muhammadu Buhari on Public Affairs. Thank you so much for your time. It's good to see you, Ajuri.
Always a privilege to be with you, my brother. Good afternoon.
Now, let's get straight to business. We are now aware that President Buhari unveiled the new NNPC Limited to the world earlier this week. What I want to ask you is, we've gotten experts to talk about this, but for you, what can you tell Nigerians about the difference between what is obtained previously in the old NNPC and what we can expect under the new NNPC Limited?
Thank you very much once again. First and foremost, it would be important to note that previously you had a situation in which the NNPC was effectively an appendage of the federal government of Nigeria, a public corporation, meaning that the governance structure of the NNPC was so intertwined with the federal government of Nigeria that there was that lack of ability to function as a purely profit-seeking institution. So what you now have is a transition from essentially the NNPC as a public corporation into now being a limited liability company subject to the tenets of the Companies and Allied Matters Act, CAMA, 2020, which was also signed into law by Mr. President. The implication of that, and there are a few of them, the major one is that because it's subject to the new CAMA, you now have provisions of the CAMA such as the yearly audits that are now mandatory to be taking place every financial year. So there's a level of accountability, a level of transparency that can now be expected from the NNPC that perhaps may not have been the experience over the last several decades. And in addition to that, the governance structure was such that you now had a setup where, of course, the Minister of Petroleum Resources, for example, or the Minister of State for Petroleum Resources would be on the board of NNPC, and there was just a lot of intertwining. What you now have, though, is a structure, two special purpose vehicles created by the Petroleum Industry Act, which are the Ministry of Finance Incorporated and the Ministry of Petroleum Incorporated, which were created as SPVs to essentially hold government's stake in the operations or in the kind of profit or revenue kind of sharing formula, as it were, of the new NNPC Limited. So those are some of the new innovations. But beyond that, before now, you would have to go to the Federal Executive Council in order to be able to make critical decisions. The business is going to operate through the Minister of Petroleum Resources, etc. Now you have a situation where the highest decision-making body in the NNPC, in the new NNPC Limited, is the board, the NNPC Limited board. So the board of directors is now the highest decision-making body, meaning that you're now free. The NNPC Limited is now free from the public sector regulations such as the Fiscal Responsibility Act, the Public Procurement Act, in some of the other acts that would have, kind of encumbered their ability to move quickly and make decisions that would allow them to operate and take advantage of opportunities as they come up without having to go through so much of the bureaucratic process that some of these, that the old corporation was known to have dealt with. So by delinking it from the public sector, the way that it now has been done, you now have a situation where their sole focus is seeking those profits for the 200 million plus shareholders in this country. And we're expecting a huge amount of revenue generation and boosted revenue.
It's quite significant looking at what you've highlighted. But let's now come down to daily livings of Nigerians. How does this impact us, ordinary Nigerians?
Well, there's no doubt that that's the crux of what this is all about. How do we, of course, in your intro, you were referring to some of the issues around debt servicing and some of the economic crunch that not only Nigeria is facing, but countries around the world, both developing and developed countries, are now facing. The truth of the matter is, anytime you have political interference in what should be business practice, business operations, you are going to have a significant amount of slowdown. You're going to have a significant amount of maladministration, just in the sense that you have political actors who are motivated by political interests, who are now injecting those interests into what ordinarily should be a profit maximizing business enterprise. Now that has been delinked. So naturally, what Nigerians can expect is a situation in which very talented oil and gas practitioners, these are men who have been bred up through the industry over decades with experience. They are now unencumbered by some of these political forces and bureaucratic forces to be able to make these decisions quickly. The expectation should be that revenues would be quickly expanded, even at the transition on unveiling, or the unveiling of the new NNPC Limited. The group CEO, Ngelale made it known to Nigerians that they can now expect, for example, this is just one fruit out of many, that the current downstream, the current 500 plus retail filling stations in the country, NNPC retail filling stations in the country, that had been put in place starting in 2002. So basically, in 20 years, we've been able to do 500. With this move right now, he announced that the NNPC Limited will be putting on ground over 1,500 new retail filling stations, NNPC retail filling stations nationwide, in addition of 1,000 filling stations over the next 6 months. That's the kind of difference in speed we're talking about between the operation of a public corporation and the operation of an independent limited liability company. So they can now take advantage of the opportunities before them, because they're now taking control of the profits that they're making to reinvest into the business itself. The expectation, of course, these investments create new revenue generating opportunities. Already, the NNPC is the largest taxpayer in the nation. The joint venture partners, such as Total and others, are amongst the top 10 highest taxpayers in the nation today. We can expect that to dramatically increase. So the benefits for Nigerians, I think those will speak for themselves as time goes on.
Now, NNPC Group CEO, that's NNPC Limited Group CEO, Mr. Ngelale Kyari. I've also had opportunities to speak with him, and the focus has been a lot on concept of value addition, just like you talked about the filling stations. But what more? We're talking about value. Is value really being added across the board?
Oh, without question. This has been a driving focus of the administration of NNPC over the last few years. I think it's important to note, as I answer this question, that even before this transition on July 19th, they had already, in early 2022, launched their new 10-year strategic roadmap aligned with the tenets of the PIA. So once these new powers and opportunities availed themselves by the assent of the president to the PIA, making it an effective law in the country, they were now able to say, look, based on these new powers, these new opportunities, this is what we're planning over the next 10 years without all of these previous encumbrances. Now, with that, what you now have is a situation where we have seen over the last 6 months the NNPC, for the first time in 44 years, opening its books to the Nigerian public. It had never really happened before at that scale. we now had, for the first time in decades, a declaration of profit after tax of 287 billion. And we know that that's only a starting point. We know we can do much better than that. The new NNPC Limited, without the bureaucratic and political interference, will be able to do much better than that. In addition to that, when we talk about value addition, this really cuts across multiple sectors, so I have to break this down a bit. If you talk about the oil sector, naturally, when you think of value addition, you're talking about refining. In terms of the majority of what you're talking about is refining. What the NNPC has been doing over the last few years has been keying in, not only enabling, obviously the administration of the president has put policies in place, tax credits and other policies to enable private investment in refining in Nigeria, oil refining. But what the NNPC has done is said, look, once these investments hit the ground, we have to key into that. We need to partner with them so that we can have a seat at their table when decisions are being made, but most importantly, so that we can actually have some of the revenues that they will definitely be generating. So we've seen over $1 billion the NNPC has paid to Dangote's company to take a 20% stake in the new Dangote refinery. We know that what is coming back to us in terms of returns to the Federation of that 20% is far more than the investment that we're putting up front to have that 20% stake. A company called African Petroleum is putting in place a new 100,000 barrels per day refinery at the old Port Harcourt refinery complex site, basically a co-location, a brownfield project. What that entails for NNPC is that NNPC has now is providing funding up front to be able to now take 10% ownership stake in that new refinery that's being done by African Petroleum Company in Port Harcourt. So that's the oil side of things. We're keying in, making sure that we create new revenue streams for the Federation, new revenue streams for the 200 million shareholders of the new NNPC Limited by finding a new opportunities for value addition. In the gas sector, the NNPC, under the leadership of President Muhammadu Buhari and, of course, GCEO Mele Kyari, has put in place the $200 million Oredo gas handling facility, which is now in Edo State, where we're essentially processing our gas products into items that we can now not just supply the domestic market with, but ultimately export to the international community. Obviously, cooking gas, LPG, obviously CNG. There are so many products that we can now, put that finishing touch on to be able to maximize our revenue generating potential. Then, of course, the last thing I would mention in terms of value addition is the fact that it's not enough for us to just be looking at how to process what we produce. But it's also about how do we transport these items, which is why the president has been investing so much in transmission infrastructure across the various sub-value chains of the oil and gas industry. And Nigerians have a lot to look forward to, not just the small modular refineries where we have ownership stake through the NCDMB, but also the large refineries that we have ownership stake in through the leadership of the NNPC. There's a lot to look forward to with value addition.
Interesting stuff there. Now, let's wrap up on this note. It's going to be a two-in-one question. One of the key policy changes, of course, that we've been talking about, we've said is a year of gas, is the focus on gas, which I also see that we need to take advantage of, looking at our proven and even unproven reserves that we have as a country. What do you think would happen with regards to gas, and what can Nigerians expect from it? And do you really believe that government would allow NNPC to operate as a full company on its own, private, profit-focused company? Do you think that will really happen?
Thank you very much, my brother. There are a few things there to unpack. Let me just start from gas. This will probably go down as the central legacy of President Muhammadu Buhari in the oil and gas sector, aside from, of course, the PIA ascent and so many other moves. the pivot really from oil to gas is going to be central to how Nigerians remember what President Muhammadu Buhari achieved. And much of it, the benefits of much of it, will not necessarily be enjoyed during his administration. But years later, they will appreciate all of the sweat and blood and effort that he put in place to make the future economy of Nigeria possible when it arrives very soon. Let me be very precise now on what I'm talking about. The president has put in place, of course, the $12 billion Train 7, NLNG Train 7 project, which deals with the production component, right? So when we're talking about producing the crude gas, for example, you now have essentially the Train 7 project adding approximately a third of our total gas generation capacity, production capacity in the country to our total gas generation capacity in the country. So we're going to be going to about 3 million tons per annum from about 2.2 million tons per annum as a result of that massive NLNG Train 7 investment. And already, my brother, I can tell you that President Muhammadu Buhari is moving expeditiously with our international partners on Train 8 so that we're not waiting until Train 7 is done before we start working on Train 8. We want them to go simultaneous. So we're being very aggressive under this administration in gas production. But now we also understand that it's not enough to produce gas if you cannot transmit it, right? So now you have to take it to the market, which is why the president over the last 7 years has quietly invested billions of dollars in new gas transmission pipeline networks. So for example, you have the Escravos to Lagos gas pipeline system that was done in about 1988 or 1989. He has now dualized it effectively, doubling the capacity, gas transmission capacity from the Niger Delta to the west to be able to empower Western industry with double the amount of gas, from 1 billion standard cubic feet per day to now 2.2 billion standard cubic feet per day with the ELPS-2 system that he put in place. In addition to that, we have the OB3 pipeline, which is another pipeline that's able to move 2.2 billion standard cubic feet a day per gas, that basically moves gas from Obiafu in River State through Obricom in Delta State to Oben in Edo State, which now links up with the critical Ajeokuta to Kaduna to Kano gas pipeline, 614 kilometers, $2.8 billion. It will be completed during the life of President Muhammadu Buhari's administration. What that does is it allows us to transmit gas to markets across the entire nation. We now have full gas transmission coverage. Now you can have northern industrialization, eastern industrialization, and western industrialization at an advanced scale. In addition to that, the president did not wait for the Russia-Ukraine crisis to take advantage of future opportunities with international export of gas. The AKK project is actually the root piece of the larger trans-Saharan gas pipeline project that's going to transport Nigerian gas out of the Niger Delta through the AKK, through the Sahara, into the Algerian pipeline network that will now take Nigerian gas through Algeria to Western Europe, serving as a big alternative to Russian gas and also as a major foreign exchange earner for the future of Nigeria's economy. We're talking tens of billions of dollars of new gas revenues from the international market for the Nigerian economy in the future because of the president's vision and determination to put that gas transmission infrastructure in place. And then, of course, when we talk about processing, I've already talked about Oredo, a $200 million investment, and we have many other investments coming on stream in terms of gas processing and taking advantage of those for, things like pharmaceutical industries, petrochemicals, plastics, and many others, value additive industries that will come as a result of these massive investments in gas production and transmission. But you asked the final question, which was, will government actually allow the NNPC to function independently under the new transition arrangement? Let me be very clear. Because of the governing structure that has been put in place, that could have only been put in place with the political will and integrity of a man like President Muhammadu Buhari, there's a reason why previous presidents didn't do it. They didn't want to let go of the purse strings. The president has said, look, we're going to let go so that the nation's economy can grow. Let the professionals do their work. Now, what we're going to benefit from that is that the National Assembly is not going to be calling the new independent NNPCL for countless inquisitions, budget hearings, the kind of
the budget padding and the deal making that goes on in the National Assembly with some of these institutions, that is now a thing of the past. And that is because the president was able to put this in place. So my point is that there's no doubt that the new NNPC will be able to function as an independent business. And as a result of their independence, they will be able to take swift decisions without recourse to public resources. It will actually be their own resources to take the best possible business decisions in a nimble way, in an agile way, in a rapid way, so that we don't lose those business making opportunities to other countries that don't have the kind of bureaucratic and political interference that we've suffered over the last several decades. Everything is moving in the right direction.
Well, it's a good way to leave it there. Brilliant conversation there. I've been speaking to Ajuri Ngelale. He's the Senior Special Assistant to President Muhammadu Buhari on Public Affairs. Thank you so much for making us understand this perspective regards to this development. Do enjoy your weekend, and thank you for your time.